Now, before everybody goes crazy in the comment section, calm down. When I say this team is the worst organization in the NBA, I'm really just talking about they're in the conversation. Because when you look at the history of the Minnesota Timberwolves, my God, this has to be one of the worst organizations, not only in basketball history, but in sports history. I mean, everything from draft picks to bust, from lawsuits, yes, we'll get to that, to just straight up trash and a horrible product given to their franchise's fan base. The Minnesota Timberwolves have been at the top of the list essentially every single season of their existence. But before we go any further, you guys, if you are not following me on Twitter, make sure you follow me on Twitter. Also, you guys, follow me on Instagram and add me on Snapchat. Those links will be down below in the description box. And if you're not subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and drop a like down below. But back to the video at hand, the Minnesota Timberwolves. The Minnesota Timberwolves were created in 1989, and they are about to enter, I believe, their 20th season. And the Minnesota Timberwolves right now have a losing record overall with a winning percentage of 39.7%. and a postseason series record of 2-9. Yes, they have had 11 postseason series and they've only won 2 of them. that's just ridiculous. And the only 2 wins actually came in one season, and that was the 2004 season where, yes, you guessed it, Kevin Garnett won his infamous MVP. They defeated the Denver Nuggets in the first round, won in the semifinals as they defeated the Sacramento Kings in 7 games, and they lost in the conference finals to the Los Angeles Lakers, who would go on to lose the NBA Finals to the Detroit Pistons. But aside from that, every single playoff appearance has been met with a first round exit. 1997 up until 2003, first round exits each and every season. And what I also find funny is after the 2004 season, the Minnesota Timberwolves will go on to have one of the worst playoff droughts in sports history. Yes, in sports history. And I know that they finished with a over 500 record in the 2005 season, but when you're in the Western Conference, finishing over 500 is not always going to get you to the playoffs. Everybody knows that. And aside from that, they have not been over 500 until this past season, which leads me into what I'm going to talk about. Because let's talk about the picks that the Minnesota Timberwolves have had. I mean, they have had some of the worst picks that I have ever seen in my life. I mean, for one, let's just look at Chris Dunn. Look, I understand they traded Chris Dunn after his rookie year, but at the end of the day, Chris Dunn was a player that was severely utilized, and whether it's Tom Thibodeau or just the fit, he was not picked above players that he was clearly better than. Buddy Hield, better in my opinion right now, way more valuable because he can space the floor, and Jamal Murray, that's not even a debate on who's better. And then you look at Corey Brewer, another player that they had a huge bust on. Let's just call it what it is. He may have had a productive career, but he's a bust. Wesley Johnson as well, the 4th pick in the 2010 NBA draft, ahead of players like DeMarcus Cousins, Gordon Hayward, Paul George, Eric Bledsoe, and even Avery Bradley. Hell, let's not forget Derek Williams. Derek Williams was the 2nd pick in the 2011 NBA draft, picked ahead of players like this: Kemba Walker, Klay Thompson, Kawhi Leonard, both of the Morris twins, Nikola Vucevic, Tobias Harris. Hell, I even throw Kenneth Faried in there. You also even have Nikola Mirotic, Reggie Jackson, and how could I forget the guy that we're going to talk about later in Jimmy Butler. And just when you thought that there was more, there's more. Johnny Flynn, the guy who they picked, and actually there's more because they picked Ricky Rubio as well, 2 point guards. They picked Johnny Flynn and Ricky Rubio in the 2009 draft, where they infamously missed on Steph Curry. Not once, but twice. I just find that hilarious, and it just fits in to the narrative on how bad the Minnesota Timberwolves have been as an organization. I mean, this is an organization that had a near 15-year drought on playoff appearances. That is horrendous. And when they ended up getting an all-star caliber, hell, all-NBA caliber player in Jimmy Butler, who made the all-NBA third team and is an all-NBA defender and an all-star, guess what they do? Not only does he get hurt because Tom Thibodeau just overplays everybody, he gets hurt and they drop to nearly missing the playoffs in its entirety. This is a team that was among the 3 best teams in the Western Conference and among, I believe, the 5 best teams in the league record-wise. And then when their best player goes down due to injury, the 2 players that they drafted at number 1, yes, number 1, could not hold down the fort. I am just disappointed and appalled that this team just manages to screw up opportunity after opportunity. And what I also find funny is that the 2 players that they drafted at number 1, there's an argument that they may not even be the best players in their draft class. And I know Wiggins for sure is not the best player in his draft class, as he is in a draft class with Joel Embiid, so that automatically eliminates him from the conversation. And when you look at Karl Anthony Towns, there are some players that could end up being better than him when it's all said and done. Players like Kristaps Porzingis, and hell, I'll even go as far as to say Devin Booker as well. So at the end of the day, when you look at this team's draft picks, even the ones that panned out in a good light, there's a chance that they could still be a little disappointing. And when you look at the money that they gave Andrew Wiggins, you gotta think that this team is severely disappointed with his production last season, as it kind of proved that he's just a dead stat player and he's not really much other than a scorer who's not that efficient. So when you also look at the fact that the lawsuits that this team faced, yes, we're going to discuss that. Did anybody forget Joe Smith? Because I have not forgotten that. For those who don't know, Joe Smith was a player that entering the 2003 NBA season was offered numerous contracts, but there was a lot of debacles going on as he would decline big time contracts because he was putting up relatively decent numbers and a lot of teams wanted to sign him. But eventually he picked the Minnesota Timberwolves on a very weird decision because he was offered numerous contracts that were better, but a lot of people just said, okay, whatever, and they just overlooked it. But then became some very fishy things going on as he would take another 1-year deal that was not that lucrative compared to the other contracts thrown his way. And then David Stern said, you're not going to fool me this time. And he ended up busting the Minnesota Timberwolves as they made a under the table deal that if he signed numerous 1-year deals, that they would throw him a huge max contract, because I believe that's what gives you your bird rights if they have you under contract for 3 seasons. But they could not fool them, as David Stern will end up taking away 5 first-round draft picks in the process and finding Kevin McHale, who just so happened to step down as president of basketball operations. Yeah, just so happened. Who gives a crap? And though they did not struggle during the 2000s, especially around that 2000 to 2006 era when they had Kevin Garnett, at the end of the day, losing 5 first-round draft picks is a huge deal, especially when you consider the players that they could have drafted in that time span. Players like Tony Parker, Gilbert Arenas, and even Carlos Boozer definitely could have been some solid pieces to add to a roster that needed some supporting pieces around Kevin Garnett in his prime. And another thing that we need to discuss when it comes to the Minnesota Timberwolves is how they handled Kevin Garnett's career. Because a lot of people look at Kevin Garnett's career in Minnesota and they say it was a great run, but there were a lot of things that they could have done better, as basically every single year of his prime, he put up solid numbers, but they amounted to usually first round exits, and when they gave him some solid sufficient help, he ended up winning the MVP in the same season that his former teammate in Chauncey Billups won the finals MVP. Oh, the irony. Chauncey Billups. Chauncey Billups was a real solid player who was a journeyman basically a lot of his career, but when you gave him the right pieces around him and you gave him an opportunity, he took full advantage of that opportunity, and he showed flashes of that in Minnesota in the 2002 NBA season. But the Minnesota Timberwolves, being the bad organization that they are and being trash like they usually are, managed to screw that up again. Because Chauncey Billups, even though he wasn't putting up the flashiest of numbers or anything like that, he was still a relatively decent point guard. In the 2001 NBA season, he averaged 9 points, 3 assists, while shooting around 42% from the field, and also shooting around 84% from the free throw line and around 37 to 36% from 3. But the next season in 2002, he averaged just under 13 points, 5 assists, while shooting 42% from the field, 39% from 3, and around 88 to 89% from the free throw line. But what a lot of people don't know about that season is that he didn't even start in the first 22 games, as in the last 60 games of the NBA season, he averaged around 14 to 15 points, 6 assists, 3 rebounds, while shooting around 42 to 43% from the field, 38 to 39% from 3, and around 88% from the free throw line, and about a steal. So it is clear that Chauncey Billups, when given opportunities, was able to show up when they needed him, and he could be a player that could be a starting point guard in the NBA, especially when you had a player like Kevin Garnett who needed some solid and consistent role pieces because he's a big man and he's limited to what he can do on the court. But when you look at the playoffs in 2002, Chauncey Billups was exactly that for Kevin Garnett. As though in the closeout game, I will admit, he did not shoot well from the field. When you look at his whole entire series average, he averaged 22 points, just under 6 assists and 5 rebounds, as well as a steal, while shooting around 45% from the field, 40% from 3, and also around 70% from the free throw line. So it is clear that Chauncey Billups showed enough flashes, at least in my eyes, to be a consistent, solid point guard in the NBA. And in 2004, he would go on to join the Detroit Pistons as they would beat the Los Angeles Lakers in an upset that was heard around the world, as he won the Finals MVP in 5 games while locking and clamping up Kobe Bryant, averaging 21 points, 5 assists, and 3 rebounds, while shooting 51% from the field, 47% from 3, and 93% from the free throw line. Hell, if I was Kevin Garnett, the anger that I would feel in my spirit would be at an all-time high. I mean, you have a point guard in Chauncey Billups who played both sides of the ball, but because Brandon Terrell had some so-called potential to be a starting and elite point guard to them, they thought they could bring back his 90s days, but guess what? He got injured and they couldn't do that. And they let him walk, and he ended up winning a championship with a team that much desperately needed a point guard and consistency and an all-time great defender. And even though they didn't get the all-time great defender, they definitely got a player that could play both sides of the ball and a player that can be a consistent option for them when they needed it. So it is clear that the Minnesota Timberwolves, they misused Kevin Garnett. And if I was Kevin Garnett, man, I'd be so happy that I won a championship elsewhere. And even though he did love the team and he went back there to retire in the last few years of his career, the fact that they had one of the greatest big men and one of the greatest players in NBA history in his prime, and all that they could do was, even though he got an MVP, excluding that season, all they could do was take him to the playoffs just to lose in the first round. Hell, that's tough, bro. That's tough. But then we get to today. Because today you have a team like the Minnesota Timberwolves who have Karl Anthony Towns, who's an all-star big man and an all-NBA big man. Also have Andrew Wiggins, who was an up-and-coming NBA young player who we all thought had immense potential as a scorer and as a leader of an organization, or at least as a centerpiece to a franchise. And even though Chris Dunn didn't look the way that we thought he should have been, and Zach LaVine tore his ACL, they were able to trade those players and their top 10 pick for Jimmy Butler, a trade that we all thought, yes, a lot of people, I'm not gonna lie, myself included, thought that the Minnesota Timberwolves ran away with that trade as they picked up an all-NBA player in Jimmy Butler, who was paired with his former coach who loved him, and we all thought everything was gonna work itself out. But everything did not work itself out, as they were on top of the world in the beginning of the season as Jimmy Butler led this team. And then they fell apart when he got injured. And you want to know why they fell apart? Because Andrew Wiggins and Karl Anthony Towns may not be the players that we all thought they were. Now, Karl Anthony Towns, I think, can be a relatively decent player in NBA history, especially for his position. I mean, he is one of the most efficient centers, scratch that, players in the league. I mean, just so efficient from the field, from the three-point line, and from the free throw line. I think he can have a 50-40-90 season one day. Yes, I am that confident about his ability to score the ball. But on the defensive side of the ball, it's a little suspect, and having Andrew Wiggins, who's never been a good defender, just makes it worse for him. And their team is just heavily struggling on that side of the ball. And Jimmy Butler, it's no secret that he wants to be traded now, and they've just managed to screw things up again. I mean, here comes another 15-year drought for this team when it comes to missing the playoffs. And notice, I didn't even discuss Kevin Love either in this video, but I'll let them slide just because of the fact that they were able to turn Kevin Love into Andrew Wiggins, which eventually got them Karl-Anthony Towns in the draft, and then they ended up getting some other players and pieces, which they turned into Jimmy Butler. But that brings us back to, like I said before, which is Jimmy Butler wanting to get traded. And they can either trade him, get some pieces for him, because we can all come to this conclusion that, yeah, the Bulls won that trade. I don't give a shit what anyone thinks. The Bulls won that trade, and they got Lauri Markkanen, who is going to be a real solid player going forward in the NBA. So you guys let me know in the comment section what you thought about this video. I didn't mean to go too ham on the Minnesota Timberwolves. It's just, I've just really noticed how bad of an organization they've been, not just over the past few seasons, but over the past decade and a half. So you guys let me know in the comments. Drop a like down below if you like this video. Subscribe if you're new to the channel, and hit the bell next to it to be notified after each and every video. You guys subscribe. Also, you guys, if you're not following me on Twitter, follow me on Twitter. Y'all have a great day. I'm out. Peace.